a part of a book on money laundering from 1998. The Art and Science of Money Laundering, Inside the Commerce of International Narcotics Trafficking by Brett F. Woods. archive.org/stream/The Art and Science of Money Laundering Paladin Press /the %20 Art %20 and %20 Science %20 of %20 Money %20 Laundering %20 %20 Brett %20 F %20 Woods %20 %20 Paladin %20 Press %20 201998_DJVU.text. Contents. Introduction. The Money Laundering Phenomenon. Part 1. International Dimensions and Responses. How money is laundered. Are the laws being implemented? Correspondent banking. Offshore banking. Other compliance factors. Cybercurrency. Concerns. Suggested countermeasures. U.S. Presidential initiatives. Treaties and agreements. The Art and Science of Money Laundering. Financial Intelligence Units. Training and Technical Assistance. Significant Enforcement Cases. Asset Sharing. Representative Financial Action Task Force Activities. The Summit of the Americas. Part 2. Money Laundering Analysis by Country. Selection Criteria. Economic Indicators. Definition of terms. Country-by-country study. Summary. The Future of Money Laundering. Appendix. 40 Recommendations of the G7. Financial Action Task Force on Money Laundering. General Framework of the Recommendations. Role of national legal systems in combating money laundering. Role of the financial system in combating money laundering. Strengthening of international cooperation. Other forms of cooperation. Glossary. Selected acronyms and abbreviations used in the text. Introduction. The Money Laundering Phenomenon. Part 1. International Dimensions and Responses. How money is laundered. The Art and Science of Money Laundering. Are the laws being implemented? Correspondent banking. Offshore banking. Other compliance factors. Cybercurrency. Concerns. Suggested countermeasures. U.S. presidential initiatives. Treaties and agreements. Financial intelligence units. Introduction. The money laundering phenomenon. Money laundering is the disguising or concealing of illicit income to make the income appear legitimate. Federal law. Enforcement officials estimate that between $100 and $300 billion in U.S. currency is laundered each year. While narcotics traffickers are by far the largest single block of users of money laundering schemes, numerous other types of activities typical of organized crime, e.g., illegal gambling, prostitution, also create an appreciable demand for what has become nothing less than an art form. Although the process of money laundering has been broken down into any number of steps, it is generally agreed by law enforcement and regulatory officials that the point at which criminals are most vulnerable to detection is placement, the concealing of illicit proceeds by 1. Converting the cash to another medium that is more convenient or less suspicious for purposes of exchange, such as property, cashier's checks, or money orders, or 2. Depositing the funds into a financial institution account for subsequent disbursement. Because of the problems associated with converting and concealing large amounts of cash, placement is perhaps the most difficult part of money laundering. Consequently, this vulnerability is exploited and is the primary focus of U.S. law enforcement, legislative, and regulatory efforts to attack money laundering. Financial institutions are in a unique position to assist law enforcement at the federal and state levels by reporting suspicious transactions that might indicate money laundering. Reports of suspicious transactions have initiated a number of major investigations into a wide range of criminal activity. However, given the lack of overall direction and control of reporting suspicious transactions, reports filed with different agencies on different forms vary as to the amount of useful information they contain. Although the Internal Revenue Service, IRS, has successfully used the reports to initiate a number of investigations, the management of and emphasis given to the information varies among IRS district offices. To date, the IRS has no agency-wide policies or procedures on how best to solicit, process, and use the information. Because the IRS cannot be certain that the information is used and managed consistently, it has no assurance that the information is used to its full potential throughout the agency. Several states have recognized that reports of suspicious transactions are a criminal intelligence resource. However, how this resource is used by these states is limited, in contrast to how federal authorities can use it, because the type of information available to each state differs. To counter these investigatory problems, recent agreements and proposals made by the U.S. Department of the Treasury, the IRS, and others indicate that the difficulties associated with how suspicious transactions are reported are being addressed. If properly implemented, these steps could provide for the consistent and centralized management of suspicious financial transactions. On the international scene, there have been a number of significant developments regarding money laundering. In late 1995, a presidential directive announced that U.S. agencies intend to identify and, if necessary, impose sanctions on the most egregious offenders among governments and banks that analysis indicates are facilitating the movement of proceeds of a variety of serious crimes, including drug trafficking, arms smuggling, sanctions violations, and other offenses. Other agreements on standards and objectives were reached at the conclusion of the 1995 Summit of the Americas Ministerial Conference on Money Laundering, which established an action plan for the 34 governments of the Western Hemisphere and continued support of the Financial Action Task Force, FATF, including the conclusion of the first round of mutual evaluations of each of its member states. Other areas addressed were the consideration of proposals to update FATF's universally accepted 40 recommendations to reflect new typologies and methodologies, the beginning of evaluations of members of the Caribbean FATF, CFATF, the further enhancement of the Asian Outreach Program, the creation of a common forum for major international bankers and government policymakers, and the convening of an international Conference of Financial Intelligence Units. U.S. agencies have increased cooperation with foreign governments on major money laundering cases, and several financial center governments, such as the Bahamas and Panama, have adopted broad, new anti-money laundering policies and laws, while a number of governments are in the final stages of presenting or adopting new legislation. On October 21, 1995, President Clinton signed U.S. Executive Order 12978, utilizing the sanctions authority of the International Emergency Economic Powers Act for the first time against 80 designated individuals and businesses found to be significant foreign narcotics traffickers, including those who assist in laundering trafficker proceeds via financial transactions. The order blocks assets in the United States and U.S. banks overseas of these traffickers, their front companies, and individuals acting on their behalf, and prohibits U.S. entities from commercial and financial dealings with them. The Treasury Department. ICOLI publishes a list of target companies and individuals and directs U.S. companies and banks to block the target's assets and prohibit trade with them. But even as these initiatives are undertaken, the problems confronting policymakers and enforcement agencies become ever more complex and pervasive. The reason? Cybercurrency. The movement of money by electronic transfer technology. It becomes a question of speed, encryption technologies, and, most important, anonymity. The electronic transfer of funds is certainly not new in the United States or, indeed, most of the developed world. Large scale and wholesale payment transactions in the United States and other nations have been conducted electronically for some time. What is new today is the expansion of electronic money technology in financial transactions by consumers and smaller non-financial organizations in which the consumers are the criminals and the financial transactions are nothing more than electronic crimes. Part 1. International dimensions and responses. The number of governments that ratified the 1988 United Nations, UN, Convention Against Illicit Traffic in Narcotics and Other Psychotropic Substances, the Vienna Convention, increased in 1996. Many important financial centers have now adopted legislation to curb drug-related money laundering. However, too many priority financial centers have still not adopted needed legislation or ratified the convention. There is also a substantial question of whether the drug trafficking and money laundering laws that many governments adopted in the earlier part of this decade are adequate, given recent developments in money laundering practices and new technologies used in banking. Organized crime groups are increasingly a factor in major money laundering schemes, and the multiple sources of their proceeds compounds the difficulty of linking the monetary transaction to a unique predicate offense like drug trafficking. Moreover, criminal organizations have distinct patterns of operation that vary from one part of the globe to the next. Russian mafia groups have enlarged their presence in the Western Hemisphere and are becoming as much a concern as the traditional Italian/Sicilian mafia, Colombian cartels, Asian triads, and Japanese yakuza. Meanwhile, an increasing number of drug traffickers do not directly manage the laundering or conversion of their proceeds, but rather rely predominantly on professional money brokers. Such brokers are increasingly crafting effective schemes to evade normal monitoring, detecting, and reporting devices. To understand money laundering as it is practiced today on a global basis, one has to appreciate money as a commodity. Professional money launderers differ little in this respect from corporate money managers. A corporate money manager enters the money markets of various countries where the corporation will need national currencies during the next year and buys or sells currencies in a constant effort to improve the manager's average position at the time of payment. Similarly, money launderers use a bidding system to buy or sell drug proceeds, esp. Chile US dollars. Just as a sound investment portfolio contains stocks, bonds, and other monetary instruments, the money brokers vary their holdings. How money is laundered. Like institutional investors who put a percentage of their money into hedge funds, money brokers, and the drug traffic ERS and other criminals who employ them collaborate to minimize risk. The Colombian Cali cartel, for example, minimizes risk by selling a substantial portion of the drug proceeds it earns from the sale of cocaine in the United States. Mexican traffic ERS in heroin, cocaine, and marijuana do the same, often selling to the same money brokers in behalf of Cali or for their own accounts. These brokers will convert proceeds for a fee, or they will buy the proceeds at a discount. Given the high profit margins of the drug trade, discounts of 7 to 10% or even higher, depending on risk, are common. At the end of the day, Cali and other trafficking groups may own or control 50% cent or less of the initial drug proceeds. The following hypothetical example illustrates the options available. Assume that the Cali cartel is moving $100 million over the rather porous border from the United States to Mexico and operating on a 75% profit margin, earnings minus costs. Just $25 million must reach Colombia to replenish the operating budget. Cali wants to net $60 to $65 million from the bulk of the cash, or $85 to $90 million in total. Brokers have a bid or discount range of 10 to 15%. Cali agents will attempt to sell $25 million on the gray market supported by Latin and even U.S. businessmen who want to convert pesos or other currencies into dollars and go into the gray market to avoid exchange rates or taxes, or when profit margins are narrow on U.S. goods that can be sold in their countries, to realize higher profits. These currencies, especially pesos, can be readily returned to Colombia. The amounts over which Cali or Mexican traffickers retain actual control will be influenced by prevailing discount rates, investment opportunities, current risk dynamics, and gray market demand, more than by the presence or absence of laws. At the same time, the need for fluidity and convertibility influenced by the strength or weakness of the Mexican peso and the status of U.S. investor confidence, among other factors, will leverage the rate at which Mexican banks will do business with brokers. The art and science of money laundering. Perhaps $25 million more will be consigned to allegedly licit importers who use various invoice schemes, at a discount, to legitimatize the return of dollars to their countries. The textile trade is a typical cover. For example, a South American clothing manufacturer working with Cali will obtain a permit to export $20 million worth of suits to New York. The manufacturer actually ships $6 million worth of suits to the Aruba Free Zone, where they are repackaged and sent back to Colombia and sold at a discount. Meanwhile, covered by an export license, the manufacturer's agent picks up $20 million in drug proceeds in New York and returns it to Colombia. The bulk of the $100 million will be deposited in Mexican banks, after which a number of schemes can be used. Commonly, the money will be wire transferred to accounts in the United States. The Mexican banks will then issue checks drawn on its U.S. accounts, payable to individuals or corporations. These checks can be batched for resale in Latin America or deposited into foreign bank accounts. Enforcement officials believe that as much as $10 billion in Mexican bank drafts are laundered through such schemes each year in Panama alone. While some of the trade is in contraband goods, these checks, certificates of deposit, and other financial instruments have also been used to pay for legitimate shipments. Gold trade in the Aruba Free Zone amounts to more than $200 million a year. The Mexican banks will also issue their own dollar-denominated checks up to a level that they think will not cause inquiries. Such brokers offer as much as $500 million to a bank or an broker at a point or two below the official exchange rate. The offer is probably not for a single transaction, but reflects the amount of money a broker has at his disposal. However, transactions are increasing in size. One recent transfer reportedly involved $78 million that went through a U.S. bank in a single transaction. Why then don't U.S. reports and economic indicators reflect this volume of money transfer? The answer is fairly simple. These kinds of transactions are designed to fall outside the Scope of U.S. Treasury and other reporting. For example, U.S. banking laws do not require reports on bank-to-bank transfers, let alone transfers from one branch to another of a bank. Some of this flow shows up in physical movements of currency back to the United States. Flows from Latin America, especially Panama, Paraguay, and Mexico, to Federal Reserve banks are in fact in excess of the levels that can be explained by traditional commerce. However, currency does not have to leave a placement site physically. Banks are at least one generation or more beyond the period in which physical money was moved to settle accounts. Dollar settlements are accomplished through reciprocal balances. For example, a Mexican bank can wire $50 million to a bank in New York, which gives the Mexican bank instant credit on the latter's New York account, because the Mexican bank has simultaneously given the New York bank credit for $50 million at the latter's Mexican facility. Rather than moving physical cash to New York, the Mexican outlet is more likely to transfer physical cash south, as individual checks wend their way through various payment schemes. However, some cash does move back to the United States in bulk, carried by Mexican transfer agents who are not required to declare currency when crossing the U.S. border north. The U.S. economy is one unintended beneficiary of the kinds of swaps and schemes carried out in Mexico. The gray market enables Latin businessmen to buy goods and services here and pay for it with dollars that originated in the U.S. drug market. In sum, the schemes are real and, in fact, are becoming more complex and are being played out on a wider world stage. Are the laws being implemented? In the years since the 1988 UN Convention was adopted, and particularly since FATF issued its 40 money laundering recommendations in April 1990, dozens of governments worldwide have enacted various countermeasures, but these laws' pace of implementation and scope of application vary. A review of results reported by key financial centers about the generation of suspicious transaction reports indicates that several such centers have reporting ratios that are dispiro small, given the volume of financial activity and diversity of enterprises in their systems. Such minimal results could be an accurate reflection of a low level of suspicious activity. But these results may indicate a law that is drawn too narrowly, or a banking system that is not giving full faith compliance. In addition, it is difficult to assess how much newer electronic banking practices render banks more or less vulnerable to money laundering. Few governments have control mechanisms that adequately identify and trace such transactions. Apart from financial institutions in which officials are complicit in a money laundering transaction, such institutions are made most vulnerable by the combination of correspondent banking relations and electronic transfers. In 1995, the twin problems of regulating wire transfers and tracing wire transfers in pursuit of an investigation were close to being contained. Because FATF had reached agreement with the dominant SYS-TEM, Society for Worldwide Interbank Financial Telecommunications, SWIFT, and its key members on including in each transfer message information critical to identifying those who transmit, receive, and, especially, benefit as owners of transactions. Record keeping may have improved, however, over the past year. There does not seem to be any diminution in electronic transfers of illicit proceeds. Control efforts are being sorely challenged by the creation of new, independent wire transfer services, some of which service small clusters of banks. Correspondent banking regulators, money laundering investigators, and international policy-making bodies like FATF are facing profound challenges. Lengths from a banking world that not only knows no geography, I see horizons and is open 24 hours a day, but is increasingly connected, as large multinational banks extend their reach through not only branch and subsidiary networks, but correspondent relationships that cross the globe. The concern is not with the growth or dominance of the largest banks or the extension of their networks, but whether standards of prudent supervision are maintained at every juncture in this web of correspondent banking. The emergence of active financial service industries, in every jurisdiction, capable of becoming active players on the electronic highway of banking emphasizes ever more the need for the vetting of actions at the bank of origin. Today, there is no confidence that the current Know Your Customer policies are sufficient to actually cover most financial transactions at their origin. The scope of international banking was made clear at the 1995 Winter Meeting of the International Bank Security Association (IBSA). The world's 12 major financial centers, except Japan, have one or more banks or financial institutions among IBSA's 52 voting members and 6 associate members, and these banks include many of the world's largest international banks. An IBSA survey showed that 27 of these 58 banks have headquarters offices and/or branches in 146 countries. A CEPA rate survey showed that 19 of the 58 members own percentages and sometimes controlling interest in 144 other banking institutions. The actual reach of these big banks, both in terms of branches and holdings, is far greater. Only 27 of the 58 respond to the surveys on branches. While FATF has conducted an extensive external relations program, which has engaged an estimated 65 governments outside its own 26-member roster, no single agency, not even the United Nations Drug Control Program, UNDP, has accepted the responsibility for ensuring uniform standards of anti-money laundering enforcement or bank regulation among all nations and territories. Offshore banking. Concerns about the regulation of offshore banking has not lessened over the past few years. The assurance of absolute secrecy by many jurisdictions that license such facilities makes it possible for such facilities to be manipulated to move and conceal or generate illicit proceeds. While the offshore group of banking supervisors, OGBS, continues to promote adherence to FATF countermeasures among its members, most offshore facilities have not been evaluated by FATF, OGBS, or other organizations, and far too many questions remain about the regulation of such facilities. FATF has completed evaluations by outside experts of its own members that have offshore facilities, such as Switzerland and Singapore. The concern about regulating offshore facilities remains high with respect to most governments that issue such charters, but nowhere more so than in the Caribbean. The Bank of International Settlements has estimated that $5 billion of the $12 billion that is transacted annually through offshore facilities involves Caribbean offshore banks. Other compliance factors. Other priority concerns that carried over through 1995 include the counterfeiting of currencies and other monetary instruments, especially bonds, the boom in contraband smuggling, the buying of banks and other financial institutions by suspected criminal groups, the resort by criminals to the use of smaller, less monitored banks, and the sophisticated use of such new phenomena as direct access and pass-through banking and electronic cash systems. There is continuing concern given that financial crimes and money laundering occur with varying degrees of regularity in more than 125 jurisdictions, that some Governments still have not criminalized all forms of money laundering. Some have not given sufficient regulatory authority to central banks and other institutions. Many do not have adequate data systems to monitor trends and methods used in their territories, and many have not made adequate provision for mutual legal assistance. Cybercurrency. The use of microchip-based electronic money for financial transactions via smart cards and the Internet are assuming a potentially important place in the domestic and worldwide payments system. These chip-based cyber payments are emerging very rapidly. Cyber payments may soon become an addition to the major means of payment currency, checks, credit cards, debit cards, and automated clearinghouse transfers that are now used to make purchases. Currency paper notes and metal coins has always been of particular importance in payments involving illicit activities. Currency attributes include ease of use, wide acceptability, and, most important from the standpoint of law enforcement, anonymity. The demand for the paper dollar is enormous. U.S. currency in circulation at the end of 1994 totaled approximately $405 billion. Of this amount, foreign holdings were approximately $270 billion. A significant feature of the new cyber payments is that they include a new form of currency, a cybercurrency that is engineered to be an electronic emulation of paper currency. Cybercurrency includes the attributes of conventional currency, a store of value, a medium of exchange, a numeraire, anonymity, and ease of use. But it has added features: transfer velocity, almost instant, electronic transfers from point to point, and substitution of electrons for paper currency and other physical means of payment. Obviously, this is an innovative addition to the payments mechanism, but it requires close attention since the use of microchip and telecommunications technologies adds some significant new dimensions for law enforcement. Yet cybercurrency is not the only monetary instrument innovation. Cyber payments also comprise other payment components. Already in use or design are cyber checks, an emulation of paper checks, cyber credit, cyber debit, and so on. Furthermore, cyber payments can replace or substitute for conventional wire transfer and financial message systems. In the next few years, cyber payments will to some degree substitute for and supplement all current means of payment in a variety of monetary instruments. This new technology raises many issues, including whether such payments constitute legal tender and are susceptible to monetary reporting and supervision measures. Must reporting regulations be completely redesigned to include the reporting of currency in electronic form moving to other countries via the Internet or across the border in a smart card or electronic purse? Law enforcement issues likely to arise in this area include fraud, counterfeiting, and computer hacking. Moreover, high-speed worldwide transfers that are a facet of the cyber payment technology add complexity to law enforcement's ability to trace criminal activity and recover narcotics proceeds. Concerns. More than 100 governments have ratified the 1988 UN Convention, including the great majority of high to medium priority governments. However, inconsistent enforcement of its anti-money laundering provisions is an important factor in the continued high level of global financial crime. 8 governments ranked as high, or medium priority money laundering concerns by the U.S. government have signed but not ratified the 1988 UN Convention, and 3 other governments ranked among the higher priorities have not yet signed. Thus, almost 1/5 of the 67 governments in the 3 highest priority categories have not ratified this universal accord. 10 years after its declaration, Part 2 of this book provides a country-by-country analysis of international laundering concerns. Too many affected or vulnerable governments have not criminalized all forms of money laundering and financial crime, nor given sufficient regulatory authority to central banks. There is a need for an intensified education and persuasion effort by the world's major financial institutions and organizations to ensure a higher level of compliance globally. Too many governments continue to place limitations on money laundering countermeasures, particularly the requirement that the offense of money laundering must be predicated upon conviction for a drug trafficking offense. Finally, too many governments still refuse to share information about financial transactions with other governments to facilitate multinational money laundering investigations. There is a critical need for enhanced bilateral and multilateral international communications to inform governments and financial systems in some systematic and ongoing way about the methods and typologies of drug and non-drug related money laundering and financial crime. The layering and integration stages of money laundering are using more sophisticated money laundering techniques. Cash is now being held in bulk or placed into the financial system through exchange houses and other non-bank financial institutions. Not only is it moved through wire transfers but innumerable varieties of licit and illicit financial instruments, including letters of credit, bonds, and other securities, prime bank notes, and guarantees, without a parallel increase in the capability of the far-flung elements of the world's financial system to verify the beneficiaries or authenticity of instruments. The electronic highway now links banks and non-bank financial institutions worldwide to facilitate expanding world trade and financial services, placing ever greater priority on banks of origin to establish the identity of beneficial owners and their sources of funds. There are few controls on electronic transfers, and, compounding the problem, the bank or non-bank of origin is increasingly based outside major financial centers in jurisdictions that do not adequately control money laundering and other financial crimes. Narcotics money launderers have adopted the invoicing schemes used by contraband smugglers and are similarly manipulating commercial trade practices to move and convert illegal proceeds. The vast proceeds generated by both types of crime magnify the need for control mechanisms to address non-drug-related financial crimes. There is emerging concern about new banking practices, such as direct access banking that permits customers to process transactions directly through their accounts by a computer operating off software provided by the bank. This system limits the bank's ability to monitor account activity, such as of joint accounts and pass-through banking schemes that have been a traditional method of layering. Owners who benefit from funds can now manipulate the identity of the ultimate recipient of the funds without review by bank officers. Pass-through banking by itself poses myriad problems for regulators, by creating the ability of depositors to unilaterally create accounts within accounts, or even to provide quasi-banking services to offline customers in a kind of bank within a bank. These new bank services can limit the utility of systems in place to have both a originator and recipient information travel with the electronic funds transfer. There is continuing concern that the need for capital of many financial systems overwhelms prudent banking practices and safeguards, with respect to deposits, loans, and underwriting practices, and contributes to the increasing problem of takeovers of banks and non-bank financial institutions by criminal groups. The concern about the concentration of economic power in drug cartels and other criminal organizations, and its potential translation into political power, now embraces the Caribbean, Europe, the Middle East, and Asia, as well as the Americas. Professional money laundering specialists sell high-quality services, contacts, experience, and knowledge of money movements, supported by the latest electronic technology, to any trafficker or other criminal willing to pay their lucrative fees. This practice continues to make enforcement more difficult, especially through the commingling of licit and illicit funds from many sources and the worldwide dispersion of funds far from the predicate crime scene. Non-bank financial systems are still unevenly regulated in most parts of the world, especially at the placement stage for cash. The United States, which is taking a leadership role in regulatory non-bank financial institutions, is still drafting the regulations that would subject them to federal regulation. Non-bank financial institutions include a wide variety of exchange houses, check cashing services, insurers, mortgagers, brokers, importers, exporters and other trading companies, gold and precious metal dealers, casinos, express delivery services, and other money movers of varying degrees of sophistication and capability. Even less regulated are the underground banking systems, like the chop houses of the Orient and the Pakistani Hundi and South Asian Hawala systems. Asset forfeiture laws have not kept pace with anti-money laundering investigative authority, much less with traffickers' wide-ranging schemes. There is a conspicuous gap between the number of institutions and accounts identified by government investigations with money laundering and the authority of many governments to seize and forfeit drug and money laundering proceeds. Many banking systems remain obliged to inform account holders that the government is investigating them and may seize their accounts, providing criminals the opportunity to move assets and leave town. Consequently, there is an urgent need to prescribe corpo rate as well as individual sanctions, including actions against financial institutions that repeatedly fail to take prudent measures to prevent their institutions from being used to launder money. 2. There is a need for continuous fine-tuning of bilateral and multilateral strategies that define responsibilities and objectives country by country and set specific goals for cooperating with the varying money laundering and money transit countries. Many governments and financial systems continue to rely on voluntary reporting mechanisms, despite the inadequacy of voluntary control systems. Reports from government after government demonstrate that the adoption of mandatory controls has not caused declines in legitimate deposits or resulted in threats from traffickers. Prudent supervision of many domestic banking systems has improved with respect to money laundering, but foreign branch offices, subsidiaries, and other foreign operations continue to figure prominently in drug and other money laundering and financial crimes. There is a particular need for major international banks to ensure that governments and regulatory agencies in all jurisdictions they serve are enforcing the same high standards as charter governments. Yet, in reality, many governments seek to superimpose money laundering controls on systems that still employ loose incorporation standards and permit bearer share ownership, which vitiate the impact of these controls. The implementation of free trade agreements and regional compacts, creating trading and economic zones that transcend national borders, could increase the use of international trade as a mechanism for laundering proceeds of criminal enterprises. The impact of the liberalization of border and other customs controls, liberalized banking procedures in these zones, and freedom of access in the zones creates additional potential risks for the future. There is a need for countries that cooperate on money laundering investigations and prosecutions to share forfeited proceeds so as to reflect equitably their respective contributions. A finders-keepers approach is unfair and fails to provide An incentive for multinational efforts. Suggested countermeasures. In an electronic world in which the banking system operates through chain-linked computers 24 hours a day, there must be increased emphasis on thorough vetting of personal, New York, and financial institution accounts at the bank of origin, wherever in the world it is located. There is no substitute for a thoroughly applied Know Your Customer policy, especially as applied to those customers placing currency into the system and converting it to an account susceptible to immediate transfer outside the jurisdiction. Considerable attention must be focused on establishing international standards, obtaining agreements to exchange information, establishing linkages for cooperative investigations, and overcoming political resistance in various key countries to ensure such cooperation. Governments need laws that do the following: establish corporate criminal liability for bank and non-bank financial institutions. Apply to all manner of financial transactions not limited to cash at the teller's window. Apply reporting and anti-money laundering laws to a long list of predicate offenses not limited to drug trafficking. Criminalize investments in legitimate industry if the proceeds are derived from illegal acts. Enable the sharing of financial and corporate ownership information with law enforcement agencies and judicial authorities. But governments also need strategies, end games, if you will, that project change and progress along the same continuum as the changes in both financial system procedures and the methods criminals develop to exploit them, strategies that focus on specific governments and specific financial systems. Over time, a number of actions can be seen as needed on a continuing basis to keep pace with the dynamics of money laundering in a high-tech world. They include, but are not necessarily limited to, the following 15 activities. 1. Constant monitoring of money laundering patterns, trends, and typologies. More sophisticated techniques, involving both bank and non-bank financial institutions, in a wider array of traditional and non-traditional financial center countries have complicated identification, tracing, and investigation. Information exchanges have been improving, but critical gaps in know-how must be closed in tandem with improved cooperation. 2. Analysis of money management practices. We need improved information from more countries on what factors influence traffickers and their money managers to use particular systems in specific countries, to keep reserves in cash versus other monetary instruments, and to invest rather than park funds. Interviews of arrested drug money managers are producing detailed profiles of money management schemes. The best data so far apply to the cocaine trade, but we need to develop the same level of knowledge about heroin and marijuana syndicates. 3. Analysis of non-drug related money laundering and other financial crimes. Traffickers seldom invent new methods or practices of handling and investing money. In general, they rely on techniques perfected by corporations and individuals to shelter proceeds from taxation or to avoid strict currency controls. Terrorists, arms dealers, and other criminals similarly rely on standard measures used to shelter funds from taxation by legitimate enterprises. We need to identify the parallels between drug money laundering and financial crimes of every description and achieve an equal capability to investigate and prosecute such crimes. A number of governments are willing to impose new restrictions on drug-related financial crimes but hesitate to apply such strictures to other forms of financial crime. 4. Equating economic power with political clout. The increasing concentrations of wealth among criminal groups in a number of jurisdictions is a concern, not only because of possible impacts on investments, real estate values, legitimate commerce, and government integrity, but also because these organizations have the wealth to make large campaign contributions to candidates who, in turn, agree to assist the criminals. We need to assess the national security and political implications of these shifts and accumulations of wealth for all financial centers where such wealth is being concentrated. Illicit funds and corrupt officials represent a continuing threat to democracy in literally every region of the world. 5. Eliminating systemic weaknesses. We need banks to maintain the same kinds of records on clients that are also financial institutions as they do for other customers, and to report suspicious transactions by such clients when the same financial institutions are named repeatedly in investigations. Some currently available but underutilized mechanisms include revocation of licenses, changes in ownership and management, collection of fines, and prosecution. 6. Assessing the trafficker as entrepreneur. We need to explore the extent to which criminal organizations are penetrating legitimate financial and other businesses and using the business's vast resources to gain control and to influence economic, financial, and business decisions. More data and systematic analysis are needed on the role played by the trafficker and money launderer in foreign exchange markets, including their use of and creation of grey markets. 7. Analyzing the impact of money laundering on national governments and economies. The interplay between political and structural factors in a country upon its receptivity to money laundering, and the effect of money laundering on the political life and economic life of the jurisdiction, needs to be better understood. Among the questions that need to be analyzed are the extent to which structural macroeconomic factors such as commodity deflation, sustained high levels of unemployment, and recession have in making a country susceptible to becoming a money laundering haven. At the sector level, we need to determine the influence of black markets on legitimate enterprises. At the institutional level, we need to identify the major factors that may influence bankers and other financial managers in some jurisdictions to be more likely to accept money they have reason to believe is tainted. As we better identify where money laundering is most likely to have a macroeconomic or political impact, we need to evaluate the potential effectiveness of economic countermeasures. These could include limiting or excluding access to the global financial system of entities or states identified as major problems. 8. Regulating exchange houses and remittance systems. There is ample evidence that the various hundi, hawala, and chop remittance systems, so essential to economic life in the Middle East and South and East Asia, are being used by drug traffickers, just like the cambios, exchange houses, of Latin America and non-bank institutions of all kinds in the Western financial community. They serve vital functions for key sectors of many economies. Systems for regulating them to discourage their use to launder the proceeds of crime are essential, but will fail unless these systems take into account the very informality that makes them effective and desirable. 9. Concentrating efforts for maximum effectiveness. Enforcement operations have proven that we can disrupt cartel operations. But these organizations are resilient and recover quickly. We need to develop more effective strategies for disruption in order to achieve the destabilization of criminal organizations. Pursuing a continually evolving strategy. For much of the 1980s, concerned governments operated under a strategy that involved a handful of key countries whose cooperation was essential or that were drug money laundering centers. But the traffickers have changed tactics and Moved to new locales. Banks are but one portal. They also use securities brokers, insurance companies, and import and export companies. Every means the worlds of business and finance have to offer, linked by wireless and facsimile transmissions, are today used by traffickers and the man-agers of their illicit proceeds. Financial regulation, supervision, and enforcement need to expand to cover both the transactions that transcend national boundaries and the widening array of types of financial service businesses. UNDP should intensify its efforts to ensure that all significant financial center countries are implementing fully the anti-money laundering and asset forfeiture provisions of the 1988 UN Convention. As an immediate priority, the UNDP should focus on securing ratification by the 12 significant financial center governments that have not yet ratified the convention. FATE. Working with the OGBS and other relevant organizations, should focus increased attention on offshore banking. FATF has been quite effective in reaching out to this group. A majority of offshore banking centers are either members of FATF or the CFATF, or have participated in FATF/CFATF seminars that provided guidance on adopting or implementing FATF and UN guidance. More analysis is needed of the methods used to move money through offshore banks, and OGBS should be supported in its efforts to include as many offshore banking centers as possible in its membership and in its parallel effort to evaluate progress by its members. 13. The adoption by governments of Information Standards Rec. Amended by FATF and the SWIFT Banking Information Network is a welcome if not yet universal step. Many more governments need to cooperate in adopting regulations to help curb the misuse of electronic transfer and payment mechanisms to launder illicit funds. 14. Governments and banking systems alike must be more vigilant in efforts to detect counterfeit currency and other monetary instruments. The schemes involving counterfeit bonds and other securities, usually as collateral, suggest that there is a need for an international clearinghouse to assist banking and financial systems outside the major centers in determining the authenticity of offered documents. 15. Governments and banking systems must exert greater efforts to identify and prevent a wide range of financial crimes, not just drug and non-drug money laundering, but also financial frauds, such as prime bank guarantees. Again, the history of such frauds suggests a need for a clearinghouse that can assist financial houses in identifying customers and authenticating documents. U.S. presidential initiatives. In a speech to the United Nations in October 22, 1995, President Clinton announced a new U.S. initiative against money laundering. The President declared that those governments that were identified by the United States as being just centers for money laundering and that did not take corrective action could be subjected to sanctions. The initiative, which is known by its authorization as Presidential Decision Directive 42, includes within its scope not only drug-related, but other types of money laundering, and also financial crimes associated with arms and contraband smuggling, nuclear proliferation, financing of terrorist groups, organized crime activities, and violations of UN or U.S. sanctions. As a follow-up to the President's speech, the U.S. government has developed and is implementing the following two complementary analytical processes. 1. The categorization of each country's money laundering vulnerabilities, based on generally accepted standards of judging anti-money laundering laws, the adequacy and level of enforcement of these laws, and the degree of international cooperation, and 2. An assessment of the threat to U.S. national security that money laundering poses related to certain key criminal activities, including narcotics trafficking. This process yields for the United States a list of priority countries to approach about specific shortcomings in their anti-money laundering laws and enforcement efforts. The initial work with these countries will be based on diplomatic negotiation. President Clinton stated at the time of his UN speech that failure to change a nation's status as an egregious money laundering haven could result in the imposition of sanctions, up to denial of access to the U.S. banking system. Treaties and agreements. Mutual Legal Assistance Treaties, MLATs, are negotiated by the U.S. Department of State in cooperation with the Department of Justice to facilitate cooperation in criminal matters, including money laundering and asset forfeiture. They are in force with 19 governments, including Argentina, the Bahamas, Canada, Italy, Jamaica, Mexico, Morocco, the Netherlands, Panama, Spain, Switzerland, Thailand, Turkey, the United Kingdom with respect to its Caribbean-dependent territories, the Cayman Islands, Anguilla, British Virgin Islands, the Turks and Caicos Islands, and Montserrat and Uruguay. MLATs have been signed but not brought into force with 8 other governments: Austria, Belgium, Colombia, Hungary, Korea, Nigeria, the Philippines, and the United Kingdom. Similar treaties are in various stages of negotiation elsewhere. The United States also has signed the Organization of American States, OAS, MLAT. In addition, the United States has entered into executive agreements on forfeiture cooperation, including 1. An agreement with the United Kingdom providing for forfeiture assistance and asset sharing in narcotics cases, 2. A drug-related forfeiture agreement with Hong Kong, and 3. A forfeiture cooperation and asset sharing agreement with the Netherlands, but not yet in effect with Aruba and the Netherlands Antilles. The United States has asset sharing agreements with the Cayman Islands, Colombia, Ecuador, and Mexico. Financial Information Exchange Agreements, FIEAs, are bilateral executive agreements that facilitate the exchange of currency transaction information between governments. An FIEA provides a mechanism for exchanges of such information between the U.S. Treasury Department and another government's finance ministry. The ability to quickly exchange currency transaction information in money laundering matters aids in achieving mutual enforcement goals. The United States has FIEAs in effect with Colombia, Ecuador, Panama, Paraguay, Peru, Mexico, and Venezuela. Each FIEA requires that both parties enact or have legislation that requires the reporting or recording of large currency transactions conducted at financial institutions. On December 2, 1995, the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, FinCEN, signed a Memorandum of Understanding (MOU) with the government of Argentina. The MOU was formulated within the framework established by the Summit of the Americas, December 1994, and its Ministerial Conference concerning the laundering of proceeds and instrumentalities of crime, December 1995. The parties agreed to provide each other with general information relating to money laundering, illicit drug trafficking, and related crimes, including information on trends and patterns involving the proceeds of drug trafficking or the international transfer of illicit assets. The parties also agreed to furnish one another with information about financial transactions, in coordination with appropriate authorities in each case, involving particular investigations of illicit activity, ties or operations. The 7 FIEAs currently in effect differ in scope, providing for the exchange of information in 3 categories. 1. Financial transactions associated with money laundering as a result of narcotics trafficking. 2. Financial transactions associated with money laundering regardless of source of funds, or 3. Financial transactions associated with illicit activities, not limit ed to money laundering. Generally, requests for information and information provided must be case-specific, tied to a violation of law, and request in writing including as much identifying information as possible. Information provided must be used only for the purpose requested and not be further disseminated, disclosed, or transmitted without the written approval of the provider of the information. In urgent circumstances, the FIEA with Mexico allows for requests to be made by telephone or telefax, followed by a written request. Although FIEAs are potentially a highly valuable tool for obtaining financial transaction information from foreign countries in support of money laundering investigations, few requests have been made with the exception of Mexico, which has actively used the FIEA to obtain financial transaction information from the United States in furtherance of its anti-money laundering efforts. U.S. Customs has mutual assistance agreements with Argentina, Australia, Austria, Belarus, Belgium, Canada, Cyprus, the former Czechoslovakia, now extended to the Czech Republic and Slovakia, Finland, France, Germany, Greece, Hungary, Italy, Korea, Mexico, Norway, Poland, Russia, Spain, Sweden, the United Kingdom, and Yugoslavia. Customs has negotiated agreements with other countries that are not yet in force, Denmark and Honduras being but 2 financial intelligence units. FinCEN took the first concrete steps in an effort to establish an international network of the specialized anti-money laundering organizations known as Financial Information Units, FIUs. In June 1995, representatives of 24 nations and 8 international organizations met at the Egmont Arenberg Palace in Brussels to discuss FIUs. Chaired jointly by FinCEN and the Cellule de Traitement des Informations Financières of Belgium, the meeting in Brussels enabled participants to become acquainted with the already existing FIUs and to open communication channels. It initiated discussion among these organizations on practical ways for sharing information. The issues identified by the Egmont Group continued to be developed through the efforts of 3 working groups and were once again addressed in a subsequent Egmont meeting in Paris in late 1995. The Egmont Group is an unofficial organization of the several dozen FIUs in existence thus far. The existence of the group is a reflection on the success of FATF Recommendation 24, the creation of a centralized authority to take in and analyze SIS transaction reporting. FinCEN has launched an FIU orientation program for 4 counterpart agencies. This initiative contributed significantly to the enhancing of the cooperation between these agencies, beginning with 3 representatives from the Netherlands. Transaction Disclosure Office, Meldpunt Ongebruikelijke Transacties, MOT, FinCEN provided a 2-week structured series of briefings on its various functions and responsibilities. A 1-week version of the orientation was repeated for a 7-member delegation of Polish officials responsible for drafting legislation that will establish an FIU in that country. In France, a 2-week program was used for a representative from France's Traitement du Renseignement et Action contre les Circuits Financiers Clandestins. FinCEN became more involved in assisting countries of Eastern Europe and the former Soviet Union in establishing FLUs, finding widespread support among Polish officials for the creation of such a unit. FinCEN organized a money laundering seminar in Warsaw for approximately 40 government officials in February 1995. The conference also included participation by representatives from Belgian, British, and French FLUs. The Polish Ministry of Finance has taken the lead in sponsoring necessary legislation to create an FU. In September 1995, FinCEN met with officials of the Russian government to discuss holding a similar seminar in Moscow. The Russian response was positive, but by no means conclusive. In 1995, FinCEN began working with the Interpol Proceeds of Crime Group, FOPAC, on an analytical project to assess the money laundering situation in countries of Eastern Europe and the former Soviet Union. FinCEN and FOPAC worked to develop a questionnaire for use during visits to each of the 23 countries encompassed by the project. The questionnaire addresses money laundering trends, the financial services SEC tour, and relevant legislation for use in information gathering. This is currently an ongoing process and, since its inception, FinCEN and FOPAC representatives continue to visit countries in the region, including Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Russia, Romania, Moldova, and Poland.